The notification lit up my screen on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing contracts in my corner office, 32 floors above Auckland's waterfront. It was a message from my mother-in-law, Diane Whitmore, sent to the entire family group chat. Final reminder, Whitmore family wedding celebration, Saturday at Halcyon Estate. Dress code is black tie. This is a prestigious event, and we expect everyone to represent the family appropriately. Some of us more than others, please make an effort. That last line. I'd learned to read between those lines years ago. Some of us meant me. It always meant me. My name is Zara Nguyen Ellis. I'm 31 years old, and according to the Whitmore family, I have never been quite enough. Not polished enough, not well-connected enough, not the right kind of successful. My husband James had married me 6 years ago, against his mother's very vocal objections, and in the years since, Diane Whitmore had made it her quiet mission to remind me of that fact at every family gathering. I set my phone face down on my desk and looked out at the harbor. The morning light was catching the water in that particular way it does in autumn, turning everything copper and silver. From this window, on a clear day, you could see all the way to Waiheke Island. You could also, if you knew where to look, see the rooftop of Halcyon Estate, itself the boutique luxury venue the Whitmore family had booked for young cousin Oliver's wedding reception. The venue they didn't know I owned. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Sophie, can you pull up the Halcyon file for me? And confirm the event booking for Saturday. Already on your screen, my assistant replied. And yes, the Whitmore Castellano wedding reception is confirmed. Full venue hire, catering package, florals. Booked 8 months ago through the corporate account. Thank you. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how I'd gotten here. 5 years ago, when I left my position as a mid-level analyst at a commercial property firm to start my own company, James's family had reacted with something between pity and contempt. His mother had pulled him aside at Christmas dinner not quietly enough and said that she worried about his future with a woman who didn't understand the value of stability. His father, Jeffrey, had patted my hand at the table and told me that entrepreneurship was admirable in theory, but perhaps better suited to people with the right background, the right networks. His sister, Natalie, had been kinder, but only marginally. She'd sent me an article about the failure rates of small businesses with a message that said, "Thought this might be useful. Just being realistic." James had defended me, privately. But at family events, he went quiet in that particular way that told me he'd grown tired of the battle. I didn't blame him entirely. The Whitmores were exhausting people to fight. What none of them knew what I had carefully, deliberately kept from becoming public knowledge in our personal circles was that the company I'd built from a rented desk in a shared workspace in Ponsonby had become something significant. Meridian Property Group now managed over $400 million in commercial and hospitality assets across New Zealand and 3 properties in Australia. We'd acquired Halcyon Estate 2 years ago as part of a portfolio purchase that had made the business pages of the Herald, but the Whitmores weren't the type to read the property section. They read the social pages. They read about themselves. My phone buzzed again. James, this time. Mum's in rare form this week. Oliver's fiancé's family is very well off, apparently, and it sent her into a spiral. Just a heads up. I smiled at that. Oliver's fiancée was Priya Castellano, whose family ran one of the more established hospitality groups in Wellington. Diane had been simultaneously delighted by the match and threatened by it, which was a combination that made her sharper and more territorial than usual. "I'll be fine," I typed back. "See you Saturday." I didn't mention that I had a meeting at Halcyon on Friday afternoon to approve the final setup arrangements. Some things were better experienced in person. Saturday arrived with the kind of clear, cool Auckland evening that makes the city look like it was designed specifically to host elegant gatherings. I'd worn a deep navy gown, simple in cut, expensive in the way that doesn't announce itself. The kind of dress that looks understated until someone who knows fabric gets close to it. James picked me up from the office I'd been working, which had earned a sigh from him, but not a fight, and we drove to Halcyon together. He looked handsome in his dinner suit, relaxed in the way he always was before his family arrived, before the performance began. "Mum's already there," he said. "She rang me 3 times this afternoon about the seating arrangements. Is there a problem with the seating?" He glanced at me sideways. "She moved us." I waited. Originally, we were table 4. Center, near the bridal party. She's moved us to table 11. Table 11. I knew exactly where table 11 was. At Halcyon, near the service corridor, partially obscured by a structural pillar, with a slightly restricted view of the main floor. The table where venue management diplomatically placed guests who needed to be present, but not particularly visible. Did she say why? Something about needing the central tables for Priya's family and the Castellinos, making a good impression. He paused. I'm sorry, Zara. Don't be, I said, and I meant it more than he understood. We arrived to find the venue already glowing. Halcyon looked extraordinary when it was properly dressed for an event, and the team had done beautiful work. Soft lighting through the cowrie beams, native florals along the gallery walls, the kind of atmosphere that felt both intimate and impressive. I had approved the florals on Friday. I'd also approved the menu, walked the room with the venue manager Callum, and made 2 small adjustments to the lighting rig that I thought would improve the atmosphere near the garden doors. Diane was standing at the entrance in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, greeting guests with the particular warmth she reserved for people she was trying to impress. When she saw me, the warmth recalibrated precisely 3 degrees downward. Zara, you look lovely, dear. The deer landed like a small, elegant dagger. Thank you, Diane. The venue is stunning, isn't it? It is, yes. Jeffrey found it well. Natalie's friend recommended it. Apparently very exclusive. She said exclusive with the satisfied authority of someone presenting credentials. Not the sort of place you can just book. You need connections. I said. James put his hand briefly on my back, and we moved inside. Natalie intercepted us near the bar. She was wearing red, which suited her, and holding a glass of Marlborough Sauvignon with the ease of someone already halfway through a pleasant evening. Table 11, she said to James, not quite under her breath. Mum's doing. Don't make a thing of it. I'm not making a thing of it, James said. I meant Zara. I smiled at Natalie pleasantly. I'm perfectly fine with table 11. She looked mildly suspicious at that, which I found gratifying. The dinner began well enough. Priya was genuinely lovely, warm, and direct, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from being actually accomplished rather than performing it. Her parents were gracious and quietly impressive, the sort of people who had nothing to prove and therefore proved everything. I liked them immediately. Oliver gave a speech that made his new wife cry in the best possible way. Jeffrey toasted the families. And then Diane stood up, glass in hand, and gave a speech about the Whitmore family legacy that I found remarkable in its thoroughness. She spoke for 7 minutes about 4 generations of Whitmore achievement property, law, community standing. She wove in references to Jeffrey's firm, Natalie's charity work, James's position at the architecture practice. She did not mention me once. Not my name, not my existence as part of the family. I was present at the table as a gap in the narrative, a space where a person should be. James reached under the table and found my hand. He squeezed it once. I squeezed back and let it go. It was fine. I'd learned that the moments people think they're diminishing you are often the moments that clarify exactly how small they're thinking. After dinner, I excused myself and found Callum near the service entrance. He was a good venue manager, calm, attentive, the kind of person who anticipated problems rather than reacting to them. Everything running smoothly? I asked. Perfectly, Miss Nguyen Ellis. The dessert service is about to begin. Did you want to check the garden lighting? I made that adjustment you suggested on Friday. I'll take a look after dessert. Thank you. I was coming back from the garden doors when I nearly walked into Diane. She was standing just inside the gallery corridor, glass in hand, and behind her was Priya's mother, Helena Castellano, who I'd been introduced to briefly at the start of the evening. Absolutely extraordinary venue, Helena was saying. Do you know who owns it? I tried to look it up for our events director. The management group that holds it has been very private. It's called Meridian Property Group. Callum's voice carried clearly from 3 feet away because Callum had no reason to lower it. He was speaking to one of the catering staff, but the words arrived perfectly. Part of Zara Nguyen Ellis's portfolio. She owns it, has done for 2 years. She was actually in on Friday, approving the final setup. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. I've heard it before in boardrooms. When a number appears on the screen that reorders everyone's understanding of the situation. It's the sound of calculation happening in real time. I stepped into the corridor. Diane turned. Her face was doing something I'd never quite seen it do before, cycling through composure, confusion, and something that looked almost like vertigo. Zara. Her voice had lost its customary precision. Diane. I smiled. Helena, it's lovely to see you again. Are you enjoying the evening? Helena Castellano looked between us, with the serene intelligence of a woman who had walked into many rooms and understood exactly what was happening in this one. Very much. I was just asking about the venue. It seems we've been in good hands. Callum and his team are exceptional, I said. I'm very lucky to have them. Diane said nothing. I watched her processing the specific geometry of what had just occurred, that the venue she had booked for her family's prestige event, the exclusive property she had deployed as evidence of her family's connections, was owned by the woman she had seated at table 11. I didn't gloat. I want to be clear about that, because gloating is satisfying for about 40 seconds and corrosive after that. I simply stood in the corridor in my navy gown and let the information be what it was. I should check on the dessert service, I said. Callum, thank you. Helena, I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Diane. I left them there. I found James by the garden doors, looking out at the lights on the harbor. He handed me a glass of champagne, without me asking, which was one of the reasons I'd married him. Callum found me, he said. Mentioned you'd been by. Mom knows, doesn't she? I'd say so. He was quiet for a moment. The harbor lights were doing their copper and silver thing again, even at night. There's something about Auckland water that holds light differently than anywhere else I've been. How long have you owned it? He asked. 2 years. The acquisition was in the Herald. Property section, page 12. He laughed, short and surprised. She never reads the property section. No. Zara. He turned to look at me properly. Why didn't you say anything? When they booked it, I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because I wanted tonight to be Oliver and Priya's night. Not a confrontation. Not a spectacle. I paused. And because I thought it was more important for your family to discover it than for me to announce it. He considered that. There's a difference. There's a big difference. Jeffrey found us 20 minutes later. James's father was a man who presented himself as affable and slightly detached from domestic dynamics. But I'd always known he was sharper than he appeared. He came to stand beside me at the garden, railing with the deliberateness of a man who had decided to do something and was doing it. Remarkable property, he said, looking out at the garden. The cowrie work in the ceiling is exceptional. It was restored by a carpenter in Matakana. Took him 8 months. You know your asset well. I try to know everything about what I own. Jeffrey was quiet for a moment. In the distance, I could hear the band starting up inside something easy and warm that would get people moving in a little while. I owe you an apology, he said. I looked at him. The things I said, years ago. About background and networks. He had the decency to look uncomfortable, rather than to glide over it. I was wrong and I was unkind, and I said it in front of people who didn't need to hear it. He paused. Diane and I have said many things over the years that we dressed up as concern, but were actually something less generous than that. I didn't say it's fine, because it wasn't, entirely, and he deserved not to be let off that easily. Thank you for saying so. The company. Meridian. I looked it up when Callum mentioned it. He shook his head slightly. 400 million in assets. 430, as of last quarter. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been the particular exhale of a man recalibrating. You built that from nothing. From a rented desk in Ponsonby, and a lot of early mornings. While we were, he stopped. While you were worried about my background, I supplied, not unkindly. Yes. Jeffrey nodded once, slowly, like a man accepting a fair judgment. Oliver's very fond of you, you know. He told me once, years ago, that you were the only person in the family who ever asked him what he actually wanted to do with his life rather than what he was supposed to do. That caught me somewhere unexpected. I hadn't remembered that conversation specifically, but I remembered Oliver at 19, miserable at the idea of law school, and I remembered listening to him for a long time on a bench in Diane's garden while everyone else was inside, being impressive at each other. He seems happy tonight, I said. He is. Priya is extraordinary. Jeffrey finally smiled, genuinely, without performance. She reminds me of you, actually. I let that sit. It was the kindest thing he'd said to me in 6 years, and it landed accordingly. Diane came to find me just before midnight, when the dancing was in full motion, and most people were too happy to notice quiet conversations at the edge of the room. She came alone, which took something from her. I understood. Diane Whitmore did not seek out private conversations with people she considered beneath her. I waited. I wasn't aware, she said. I know. That's not I mean to say. I should have been. I should have paid more attention to what you were doing. She said it like an admission extracted under mild pressure, which was probably as honest as she could manage at that stage. The venue is beautiful. I chose it because I thought it was the best available. It is, I said simply. I'm glad you chose it. She looked at me for a long moment, with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not warmth exactly, but something closer to it than she'd previously managed. The recalibration Jeffrey had shown me, but slower, more resistant, working against a lifetime of assumptions. James loves you very much, she said finally, which was not what I had expected. I know that too. He's told me, over the years, that I've been unfair. She straightened slightly, the way people do when honesty is costing them posture. I didn't listen as well as I should have. I could have said many things. I had composed versions of those things in my head on the drive to many family events over many years, but standing in the garden corridor of my own venue, at the tail end of a genuinely beautiful evening, they didn't feel necessary. There's time, I said. If you want to use it differently. She nodded. Just once, quickly, the way you nod when you don't trust yourself to say anything more. Then she went back inside, and I stood in the corridor for a moment by myself, listening to the band, and the laughter, and the particular sound a happy wedding makes when it's nearly over. Natalie appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. I've been insufferable to you, she said, handing me one. At times. I was protecting the family. That's what I told myself. She looked at her champagne. Really, I think I was just following Mum's lead without examining it, which is worse. It's very human. It's lazy. She tapped her glass against mine. 430 million. 40 by end of financial year, hopefully. She made a sound of genuine startlement. 470? If the Queenstown deal closes the way I expect. Natalie looked at me with something new in her expression. The beginning of actual curiosity. The kind that precedes real conversation rather than performance. What's in Queenstown? A boutique lodge portfolio. I'll tell you about it sometime. I'd actually like that, she said. And I believed her. Oliver found me as people were beginning to gather coats and call cars. He was glowing in the particular way of people on the best night of their lives so far, slightly loosened at the collar, holding Priya's hand with the uncomplicated ease of someone who has found exactly where they're meant to be. Thank you, he said. For tonight. For this place. You didn't know, I said. I didn't, but I do now. And thank you anyway. Not just for the venue. He glanced toward where his mother was saying goodbye to the Castellanos. For not making it about that. For just letting it be what it was. Priya squeezed his hand and smiled at me. And in that smile was the recognition of one woman who has navigated a difficult family for the sake of a good man looking at another. Congratulations, I told them both. You chose well. Oliver laughed. We both did. James and I drove home along the waterfront, with the city still lit up on the water's surface. He had his window down slightly, and the autumn air moved through the car, cool and salt clean, the way Auckland night air can be, when the wind comes from the right direction. How are you feeling? He asked. Good, I said. And I meant it without reservation, which was rarer than you might think after a Whitmore family event. Mum spoke to you. She did. And? I thought about it honestly. It was a start. That's what it was, a start. People don't change their whole understanding of someone in a single evening, but they can begin to. That matters. James drove for a while in silence. The harbor bridge came into view, all its lights strung across the dark water. I should have said more, he said quietly. Over the years, when they were I should have been louder. You were doing your best with a hard situation. That's generous. It's accurate. There's a difference. I looked at him. But yes, Louder would have helped. He nodded. He would remember that. I knew him well enough to know he would carry it and act on it, which was enough. What actually bothered me, all those years, I said, more to the dark water than to him, wasn't that they doubted me. Doubt is reasonable. I was young. I had no track record. Entrepreneurship is genuinely risky. Doubt made sense. I paused. What bothered me was that they never asked. They never once sat down and said, "Tell me what you're building. Tell me how you think. Tell me what you see." I turned to look at him. The dismissal wasn't about data. It was about a story they'd decided to believe before they'd gathered any. James was quiet for a moment. That's something Priya's dad said tonight, actually. In almost those exact words. He said the most expensive mistake a person can make in business is deciding what something is worth before you've done the work to find out. Smart man. He asked about you. Wanted to know more about Meridian. I smiled at the window. I'll send him a deck. I want to say something about what I learned, or relearned, in the weeks that followed that evening. Diane rang me on a Tuesday, which was unprecedented. She asked if I would be interested in looking at the commercial space her book club wanted to lease for a community literacy program. It was a small thing. The space wasn't even a Meridian property. I helped her find the right contact at another group and sent an introduction email. But she said thank you in a way that sounded like she meant it, and the call lasted 20 minutes, which was 20 minutes longer than any conversation we'd had that wasn't conducted over a formal dinner table. It wasn't transformation. It wasn't the sudden arrival of warmth where there had been none. It was something more modest and more real than that, the beginning of a working relationship between two women who had failed to see each other clearly and were attempting, slowly and imperfectly, to correct that. Natalie and I had coffee 3 weeks later. She brought questions about the Queenstown portfolio, and I answered them honestly. And somewhere in the middle of talking about acquisition strategy, she said, "You know, I think I've been competitive with you," without ever really acknowledging it, and I said, "I think that's probably true." And we both laughed, which is the kind of release that can only happen after a long tension finally finds its honest name. Jeffrey sent me a book on commercial property development in New Zealand, a good one, with a note that said, "Thought you might have read this already, but wanted to send it in case." I had read it, but the gesture mattered more than the information. I wrote back and thanked him, and mentioned a chapter I thought was particularly well-researched, and he replied with 3 paragraphs of genuine engagement. And I thought, this is what conversation between people who respect each other looks like. We could have been doing this for years. What I've come to understand, and what I would say to anyone who has been where I was, dismissed before they could be known, is this. You cannot control how people initially see you. You cannot force a person to look clearly at something they have decided not to examine. What you can control is the quality of what you build, the consistency of how you show up, and the patience you extend while waiting for the moment when reality becomes undeniable. I did not set out to prove anything to the Whitmores. I set out to build something I was proud of, and the proving happened as a consequence rather than a goal. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it does. People who build things to prove points often end up with the proof and without the thing. People who build things because the work itself is meaningful end up, eventually, with both. There is also this. The family gathering where no one announces your name in their speech, where you are moved to the outer table, where you are treated as a footnote in a story you actually understand better than they do. That evening is not the one that defines you. The hours you spend at your desk, the calls you take before dawn, the deals you walk away from because they don't align with what you're trying to create, the staff meetings where you set a standard and hold it. Those are the pages of the story that matter. The family dinner is just the occasional cover. Don't mistake one for the other. Choose to build something real rather than something loud. Let the work speak first and speak longest. And when the room finally goes quiet and everyone turns to look at what you've made, remember that the right response isn't triumph. It's simply to look back at them with the steady eyes of someone who has been doing the work all along and who intends, regardless of anyone's attention, to keep doing it. The view from a place you have actually built for yourself is different from the view you were handed or borrowed or performed. It's yours in the specific way that only earned things can be. And nothing, not a table 11, not a speech with a gap where your name should be, Not 6 years of some of us landing like small cold stones can take that from you. That is something no family can give you, and no family can take it away.